Director, and again, welcome. We're glad to have you. We hope you'll come to our next series, which Cassandra's going to introduce.
That's right. Thank you, Dana.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Cassandra Van Duzer. She said I'm the Director of Economic Development and Tourism for Talbot County. And I want to thank you for coming tonight. I know it's about dinner time and it's winter time, but for those of you who brave the elements, you're in for a real treat tonight. And we're going to talk business tonight. And I wanted to start this speaker series because we have so much talent in this community. And people go about their lives and, and there's plenty of talent in this room. But, I meet these people all the time, like Dan North, and I think, wow, I'd love to sit down and pick his brain. And you know what, if I think that, I bet y'all think that too, which is why you came out tonight. So, I am delighted to be able to introduce Mr. Dan North. Dan has been with Allianz Trade North America since 1996, using macroeconomic analysis to help manage the company's risk portfolio of more than $150 billion in annual U.S. trade transactions. He's appeared on, listen to this, CNBC, Fox Business News, and Bloomberg Radio and Television. He's been quoted by Businessweek, the Financial Times, NBC, the BBC, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. I have not. I've written for some of those, but I've not been quoted by those. After having predicted the 2008-2009 recession and its implications accurately, he was ranked 4th on Bloomberg's list of the 65 top economic forecasters in 2010. He holds an MBA from the Wharton School of Business. Tonight, Dan will give us the outlook for the U.S. economy. So join me in welcoming Dan North.
Okay, I think my lavalier is on. Great. Yes, I'm not blowing anybody out though, right? Okay, very good. Perfect. Thanks again. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pretty unusual audience. I've never spoken here before, and I grew up about 5 blocks away from here, so it's kind of a treat. I'm going to speak for about half an hour on the U.S. economy, and then we'll go to question and answer for as long as you'd like. So let's dive in here. I want to get a few things straight that I think will help understand the presentation really much better. We're going to talk about inflation a lot, and it's just a change in prices, and it's most commonly measured by the CPI. It's a basket of goods and services you might buy, food, gas, apparel, clothing, shelter, etc. The way it works is you buy the basket in January 2021 for $100. You buy it the next year for $110. Inflation's 10% year over year. Then we go to GDP, gross domestic product. It's, if you think of the economy as one big factory, everything that comes out of that factory is a product of that factory. So gross domestic product measures everything that's produced by the economy. It's the size of the economy. For our purposes, we can think of everything that's produced has to be produced by employees. So we can use it as a proxy, employment or unemployment as a proxy for GDP. So typically, when the economy gets smaller, unemployment goes up. People are unemployed, and vice versa. A recession is commonly defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. The real definition is a little bit different, but we can use that. And that leads us to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Fed is charged with balancing unemployment and inflation. That is GDP growth, if you will, and uninflation. When the economy is too hot, like it is now, there's high inflation and low unemployment. When the economy is too cool, inflation's low and unemployment is high. And the Fed manages the economy by changing interest rates. And here's where we are now. The economy is too hot with high inflation and low unemployment. And the response that the Fed does to manage that is raises interest rates. And the effect on the right there is you have higher interest rates, fewer cars get bought, fewer houses are bought, there are less people employed to build them, businesses invest in fewer projects. the economy slows down and inflation cools off. That's the idea anyhow. So those are the preliminaries. Now I'm going to start talking about the positives in the economy because there aren't a lot. But I'll start off that way. First thing is that the labor market is in pretty good shape. So the chart on the left is jobs created, which is the columns, and the unemployment rate is that blue line. Now, this is when COVID struck and we lost 22 million jobs. Ever since then, we've been recovering jobs at about 500,000 jobs every month. The average before that was 200,000. It's really important to note that that 500,000 a month really is mostly jobs recovered. Because when the economy was shut down and businesses were closed and somebody couldn't work for a month, when they came back to work a month later, that was counted as a job created. And it clearly wasn't. It was a job that was just recovered. The business was just open. So a lot of those jobs here are just recovered. But it's a good thing. We'll take it. That's a good thing. The economy can do that. And the unemployment rate now is at a 53-year low. That's a good thing, too, except the unemployment rate is a very deceiving measure. You see, to be unemployed, as far as the government is concerned, you have to not have a job, but you have to be looking for one. If you're not looking for a job, if you're at home not looking for a job, you're not unemployed, you are not participating in the workforce. So the unemployment rate doesn't count all the people sitting at home. The chart on the right does take that into account. That's the labor force participation rate. I think that's a more important measure. It's just the percentage of the population that's driving the economy. Here's where we were before COVID. Obviously it dropped off dramatically, and we're making a slow recovery. That's a good thing. We've got a ways to go back to 63.4%. That doesn't seem like much of a difference, 1%, but it is for this measure. It is for this measure. It's a better measure than the unemployment rate. You got to know what that unemployment rate is. It's close to worthless. So this data is government data that comes out on a monthly basis and usually with a monthly lag. But we have some other things called high frequency data which come out weekly or even daily. It gives a really fresh look at the economy. Well, one of them on the left is consumer credit card spending. This is a JP Morgan survey. And basically what it's saying is the blue line over 2019 is only growing about 7% annually. Well, when you've got inflation of 7%, that's not a lot of growth. And the change from the pre-COVID trend is just about zero. So that's not real encouraging. Now the chart on the right is TSA throughput. 2019, the blue line was kind of normal times. 2020, the brown line, obviously is when things collapsed. 2021 is green. 2022, you see, we got right back close up to pre-pandemic times. So I'd say air travel is pretty much recovered. The red is 2023, it's hard to say, but generally speaking, TSA flying is back pretty much to normal. Here's a couple others. One on the left there is open table seatings. Now, each line is a different year, and it compares, for instance, the brown line, 2021 to 2019, more normal times. And you can see it got back close to zero, but then collapsed at the end of 2021. And 2022, the yellow line, not bad. So you could say that we're getting back towards average. Red, that's this year, very early to tell. So that's okay. The chart on the right is hotel occupancy, and that's not great. Over the past 3 weeks, it's been negative. This was distorted by the Christmas holidays, so you could say, out of the, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 7 weeks have been negative. So that's kind of not a great picture there. One good thing that I haven't been able to talk about as a good thing in a long time is inflation. So this is that consumer price index again, and it looks like it peaked in June at 9.1%. and has come down now to 6.5%. That's a good thing, right? Well, it is. It is. That inflation probably peaked. But you have to remember what this means is we're still at a year-over-year rate of 6.5%. That's very high compared to the long-term average of something like 2.2%. So it's better, but it still has a long way to go. Perhaps more importantly, the damage is cumulative. You see, let's go back to March of 2021 when the inflation really started. Well, if we keep going up to here, this is where we are currently, we're paying 12% more on everything compared to March 2021. And even if inflation is flat, zero, month to month going forward, you're still going to be paying 12% more than you did in March of 21. It's cumulative. It doesn't go back down. Just because inflation is slowing doesn't mean prices are going back down. So it's a cumulative damage. So that's CPI, which includes like 300 consumer items. But then the things like this, over there on the left, eggs at $11.49 for a dozen. See, the Fed can't influence things like avian flu. So what it does is it strips out volatile food and energy components, and we call that the core. And this is the core rate of inflation, and you can see it's a little more stubborn. It hasn't peaked. It hasn't come down. So this is what the Fed is really worried about. It's great that this has come down. This is the one they're worried about, and it's getting pretty stubborn. But it's a good thing that inflation is slowing down. Okay, now let's talk about more the negative things in the economy. Lots of negative. Inflation, like we talked about, and the Fed's cure for inflation. We're going to look about how they're both damaging the economy, looking at the housing market, manufacturing, labor market, and the consumer. Okay. This is the problem I'm going to show you is the Fed created the problem that they're trying to actually fix. Now, over on the left are the Fed's policy tools. The Fed actually has two tools to manage the economy. You have that blue line, which is the Fed funds interest rate. You know, a lot of people say, oh, the Fed's raising or lowering rates. I say it too, but the Fed actually controls only one interest rate. That's that overnight Fed funds rate, that blue line. If you go back into the 80s, wow, it was 15, 20%. Then it started to come back down over time, and then we reached the Great Recession and the global financial crisis, and the Fed funds rate was put to zero. Never been done before. Emergency conditions. Then it crept back up, and then when COVID came along, it was put back to zero again. Emergency conditions. The other tool that the Fed uses is that brown area called the balance sheet. You just think of the balance sheet as the amount of money the Federal Reserve is making available to the financial system. It's virtual money printing. Virtual money printing. And it never used to be used as a tool. It just slowly grew along with the rest of the economy until we reached the Great Recession, and suddenly it was exploded to make sure there was enough liquidity in the financial system. Virtual money printing. Well, they tried to bring it back down, then COVID came along and it was exploded even more, making sure there's lots of credit, liquidity flowing to make loans all the way down to individuals. Emergency conditions. This was done in the second quarter of 2020. 0% rates, enormous balance sheet. It's the classic formula for inflation. Too much easy money for too long. If you wanted to create inflation, that's what you'd do. Create lots of money and make it free. That's the problem. That's where we got inflation. Then, the Fed, as I say, has made its own mistakes. It's made its own mess. First was that too much easy money for too long. And how long? Well, let's see. It put those emergency conditions in place in the second quarter of 2020. But then by the third quarter, the economy experienced this gigantic explode, this gigantic growth. So if you're the Federal Reserve, you sit there and you might say, okay, that's good. let's wait one more quarter to make sure everything's okay before we remove those emergency conditions. So they waited another quarter, waited another quarter, waited another quarter, and another, and arguably a year too long before they removed those emergency conditions. That's what I'm saying, too much easy money for too long, over a year too long. And then in 2021, they said, you know, this inflation everybody's seeing, don't worry about it. It's transitory. CPI report would come out, it's 5%, don't worry about it. It's okay, it's gonna go away. CPI report comes out and says, nah, it's 8%, trust me, it's all right. Finally, in December of 2021, the Federal Reserve came out and said, yeah, I guess that inflation that we said was transitory really isn't transitory. They admitted it. That's December 2021, and then they waited 4 more months to do anything about it. In fact, they kept loosening policy for 4 more months. It's like you just got into a car wreck and you wait 4 months to dial 911. It's inexplicable to me. They know they have an inflation problem and they don't do anything about it. So, their job trying to control inflation, they started way, way behind the curve, especially when you consider it takes 3 to 5 quarters for monetary policy changes to go through the economy. So we just had an interest rate hike a week or 2 ago. That's going to take all the way through this year to have full effect. It operates with a lag, and that's what makes it a little bit hard. In other words, the Fed has already shot ammunition of raising rates at the target that hasn't gotten there yet. So now we have the worst of both worlds. We have inflation and the attempt to strangle it, which is also going to strangle the economy. And because we have this inflation that ran away so quickly, the Fed has had to be very aggressive. The chart on the right, each line is the beginning of a hiking cycle. You don't have to look at all the lines, you just look at the red one. And you can see this is the hiking cycle we're in, so much more aggressive than it's ever been before. Well, the first victim of raising interest rates, not surprisingly, is the housing market. So over on the left there, that vertical line is when the Fed finally said, okay, inflation's not transitory. And at that moment in time, that blue line, the 30-year mortgage, went from 3% and rose up super rapidly to 7%. It's come back down a little bit, but what a rapid increase. And at that same time, that brown line is existing home sales, well, that plummeted by 33%. 33%. The chart on the right shows the same thing. Here's the vertical line. Housing permits down 29%. Starts is when you actually break ground and people start getting employed, down 22%. So this is very dramatic effect. And Fed interest rates have also had a dramatic effect on prices. So this chart over on the left is housing prices. And you can see that housing prices, as we know, were getting out of control. And in March of 2022, they peaked at 20% year over year. I mean, that's really an amazing rate. But since then, they've come down very sharply and are now down at 7.7%. Again, a good thing, but it's 7.7% compared to the long-term average of 3.8%. So it's got a way to go. It's got a way to go, especially when you consider how fast housing prices rose compared to wages. And that's the chart in the middle. Since May 20, when we reopened the economy, housing prices have risen 37%, wages 9.7%. That, to me, suggests a bubble. That is worrisome. That is worrisome. You can see this here, too, with the prices rapidly deflating. You want them to deflate, you don't want that bubble to burst. Well, we're seeing that there. Now, we still have very high prices. We have a very high mortgage rate. And you combine those two, you get that chart on the right, the affordability index, near a 36-year low. Okay, so we see that the Fed has dramatically affected the housing market. It's also affected the manufacturing sector because manufacturing sector is interest rate sensitive as well. Here are two measures. Manufacturing industrial production now negative in December of 2022. Long-term average of 3.1, it doesn't matter. We're negative now. Here are two other measures on the right. This is this ISM manufacturing index. It sounds obscure, but a lot of economists watch it very carefully. And the point is, when things are below that 50 level, it means contraction. So this total survey, this total index, the brown line, well below 50. And more importantly, there are 10 components. The new orders components, way down below 50. That's work, if it's positive, is in the pipeline, providing activity going forward. That's now shrinking. So you can see that manufacturing is actually in recession. How about the labor market? Well, the labor market is slowing as well. The blue columns on the left are the actual number of jobs created. It's on a rolling average to smooth it out. So that's 356,000 jobs created. And you can see clearly there's a downtrend. Similarly, on the right, it's a similar measure. It's the year-over-year growth rate, clearly in a downtrend over the last year as well. So the labor market is slowing. Now, we had a big jobs report on Friday. A lot of jobs created, surprised everybody. And so a lot of people were saying, what are you talking about recession when we're creating all these jobs? My reply is, that's how it works. That's how it works. You create jobs right up until the recession. So the chart on the left, I know, it's squiggly lines, I'll make it clear. Each chart on the left, each line is a different recession. So for instance, the 2007-2008, the Great Recession, is one of those blue lines in there. And it's all plotted against time, 12 months before the recession, right up to where the recession starts, out to a year afterwards. And the vertical axis is the number of jobs created every month. The point of the chart is, in every one of these recessions, out 12, 10, 6, 2 months before the recession, every one of them is still creating jobs in that green box. Still creating jobs right up until the recession. It's only after the recession starts that you start getting job losses. So you can create jobs right up until the month or month after the recession starts, and you're still creating jobs. Now, all those squiggly lines there, I averaged over there on the right in that blue line. You can see again, you're creating jobs right up to the recession, and then you start losing them. The brown line, as I reckon it, is our current path. So you can see we're pretty well on track to doing exactly that, creating jobs right up until the recession. Here's another measure of the labor market. On the left is initial jobless claims. This might be a case where somebody got fired, or the business they worked for went out of business, or the building burned down, or something like that, and they go to their unemployment office and say, I'm out of work, I need my benefits. That's what those numbers are. And you can see, going back to 1968, this is another recession indicator, every time claims have bottomed out, when claims go up, people having to claim more and more, the economy's getting worse. So you see, when claims bottom here, there's a recession, that gray column. Claims bottom here, recession here, 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 and here's where we are now. Claims bottomed in April. So you can see from that measure that not only is the labor market weakening, but it's weakening to the point where you could actually, it suggests recession. It's the same thing over there on the right. That's out of the Consumer Confidence Survey, which basically asks, are jobs plentiful? Are they hard to get? Well, in good times, that measure, jobs are plentiful. Yeah, jobs are plentiful, more and more and more, until it peaks. And that's when it means that jobs are getting harder to get. And again, every time that there's a peak in that measure, recession here, 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 here's where we are now. So clearly there's weakness in the labor market underneath the surface. You have to look under the headline, and there it is. Perhaps the most important part of the economy is the consumer, which is 70% of all economic activity is driven by the consumer. Now, the consumer, unfortunately, is getting decimated. Hourly wages, you need money to buy these things, but inflation has decimated wages. So the blue line is nominal gains in wages. Means you earned $100 last year, you earned $104.06 this year. That's the nominal rate of increase. But after you strip out the inflation, you're losing. You're losing. You're down by 1.9%. That's that loss in purchasing power. Great to get a raise, wiped out by inflation. So, you're actually losing money, decimated wages, and that is ruining consumer confidence. You can see that it's absolutely plummeting. So you've got negative wages and falling consumer confidence. Of course, you have a collapse in consumption, which is the chart on the right, on the left. This is consumption driving the economy clearly in a downtrend, now at 2% year over year, way below the long-term average. Over on the right is retail sales on a month-to-month basis. That's part of consumption, but it indicates discretionary spending. And this is really kind of shocking here. This was November and December, and retail sales actually shrunk. Retail sales have been down 4 of the past 6 months. That should be positive there. So we see that the consumer discretionary is dropping off as well. So we see that inflation and the effort to kill it by raising rates has wreaked havoc on housing, manufacturing, labor, and consumption. Let's take a look at this again. Here's inflation at 9.1, 6.5 is still very, very high, and here's the effort to kill it. Now this effort of raising interest rates so aggressively is going to do something called inverting the yield curve. It sounds somewhat obscure, but if you'll bear with me for a minute, it'll make a lot of sense, I think. So this blue line is the yield curve. It's the difference between long-term rates and short-term rates, like the 10-year Treasury note and the 3-month Treasury bill. Long-term and short-term rates. So it's plotted over here. Let's say it's 300 basis points. That might be a case where you have the 10-year at 4% or 400 basis points, and the 3-month at 1% or 100 basis points, and that gap is that 300 basis points. That's what that blue line measures. You can see that blue line varies over time, but it's almost always positive. Because if you're going to lend money for 10 years, you're going to demand a higher rate than you would for 3 months, right? Long-term rates are almost always higher than short-term rates. Except for times like now. Except for times like now, when the Fed Reserve takes this short-term interest rate and starts jacking it up to the point it becomes higher than long-term rates. And that's when the blue line goes negative. That's the inverted yield curve. Every time that happens, there's a recession. We can go back into the 60s and see the blue line went negative. There's a recession there. Early 80s, blue line negative, recession there. Here, 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 here. It's 7 for 7. And here's where we are now. 41-year low. It's a very persuasive, I think, indicator. That's the Federal Reserve, jacking up short-term rates too fast, too high. That's what the bond market is saying. You've done it too much. You've gone overboard. But it's not just the yield curve that indicates recessions. It's usually a confluence of events. Like this indicator over on the left, again from the Consumer Confidence Survey. This is a phone survey where they call people up and say, how do you feel about things now? And the response is, well, things are pretty good now. I like things now. How do you feel about things in the future? Oh, no, that looks really bad. I don't like that at all. And when those answers diverge like that, that's that blue line going down. Every time it goes down, it's followed by a recession. I know these columns are a little bit hard to see, But here, that blue line goes down, recession here, 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 and here's where we are now. Point of the chart is when consumers are worried about the future, they're right. They've always been right. And here's another thing in the middle that's almost always associated with recessions is spikes in oil prices. So we go all the way back to 1973, oil went from $3 a barrel to $11 a barrel, literally overnight, with the Arab oil embargo, recession. Second energy crisis, recession. Gulf War, look at that big spike, recession. Here's some other things that happened. Iraq War, huge spike, recession. And here's the most recent war. A lot of these oil price spikes are caused by war. And then finally, over on the right, another feature often of recessions is a burst asset bubble or an overinflated asset bubble. For instance, in 2001, we had the tech bubble burst, the dot-com bubble, where technology companies were wildly overinflated. And then in 2008 and 2009, we had the housing market bubble collapse, and you again could look at this chart. Saw this chart before, you might argue, wow, there's a housing market bubble this time around as well. So there are a number of things. It's a story, it all blends together there. It all has to make sense. And I find it, that's my position. I think we're headed for a recession. So let me wrap up. There's still a little bit of steam left in the economy, but a recession is really light. We still have very high inflation. Purchasing power is falling. Consumers are worried about the future. The housing market's collapsing. Labor market's collapsing. Most of it is the Fed is having to correct its own mistake very, very aggressively, raising interest rates to strangle the inflation, and they're going to strangle the economy with it. So we think that there's going to be a recession starting this quarter. Okay, thank you very, very much for your attention. I really appreciate your coming out tonight, and we can go to Q&A for as long as you guys would like. Yes?
Are you handing out antidepressants?
Sometimes I start this by saying, I'm about to ruin your day. But,
I'll have another question later.
okay. Yes?
How do you get out of a recession, Danny?
Well, what happens is the Federal Reserve, after a while, stops raising interest rates and then takes the gap, stops strangling the economy and eventually starts cutting interest rates. And that stimulates the economy back. That's kind of the long and short of it. So, and there's a natural rebound as well. Economies want to grow unless somebody's killing it. Peter?
So it sounds as if the fundamental issue isn't so much the interest rate, but rather the printing of money, flooding more money. Has that now stopped?
They are trying to reduce that balance sheet, yeah. You were talking about that.
Yeah.
That is getting pared back, but not very fast. The more effective tool right now is using the blue line, the Fed funds interest rate.
That's the one we all hear about.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So it is coming down. In Canada, they're doing it much more rapidly. But when we do it, we run the risk of putting a shock in the financial system. Because we've provided so much liquidity, it's hard to back out of it very rapidly. Yeah.
Any thoughts on the relation to the stock market and other investments, gold or other types of things?
No thoughts on that. Don't have any. I was in investment research for 3 years, and I learned a couple of different things. One is you can't time the markets. You can't decide, oh, it doesn't look so good, I better sell. Or I think things look great now, I better buy. There are a couple different studies that say the same thing. Over a 20-year period, studying the S&P 500, 20 years, the big returns come in a handful of days. So if you miss the best 10 days, in 20 years, your return gets cut in half. Gets cut in half. So, you know, if you're gonna try and get in and out on the right day or the wrong day, it's a pretty good trick. So, you know, you pretty much have to buy and hold, depending on your risk tolerance and, you know, how close you are to retirement, that sort of thing. But you can't time the market. And you can't buy stocks either. You can't outperform the market because most of the money managers can't beat their benchmarks. Some of them do every year or once a year, and then they come back the next year and they don't. They have a lot more information, a lot more tools than we do, and they can't consistently beat the market. So you gotta buy the market indexes. Those would be my two feelings on it. I have no idea what's gonna happen next month or this year coming in the stock market. Yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned there about the lowering the interest rates down, that kind of gets tricky there, that if you do that too much or too fast, then the inflation will kind of come roaring back.
That's right.
That's kind of tricky business there.
That's right. And that's a very good point, because the Federal Reserve is saying now, we're not done. We're not sure that inflation is killing. We've shot a lot of ammunition, but we're not sure. So we're going to keep on shooting until things are done.
I mean, I have too good a memory of going back to the very end of the Carter administration when Paul Volcker was head of the Federal Reserve and those interest rates went way up. I'll never forget those days.
Yeah.
You haven't seen anything like that.
No.
since.
The 18% mortgage.
Yeah, 18,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Just think of what things would be like if it got up to that high now.
Right. That's why they have to be so aggressive, and that's the other part of the problem. And you're right, if they stop too soon, then they run the risk of inflation coming back. My opinion on it is they could give it a pause. Again, because they've shot so much ammunition that hasn't even reached the target yet. And you've seen so much in this presentation of the economy slowing. So why don't we hang on for just a little bit? They're saying, no, we're not going to do that. I think that's also weighing on the economy. That's the forecast. Yes.
But there's still a lot of pent-up liquidity in like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Inflation Reduction Act. That money hasn't flowed yet. And when it does,
Oh, yeah.
that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, there is, I was going to put it in there, but, you know, we had $5 trillion of stimulus to get us out of COVID. That didn't help. That certainly threw gasoline on the fire. No two ways about that. But I still think it's the Federal Reserve with too much money for too long that really caused the problem. Now, you're right, the other stuff hasn't flowed through yet. We'll see, you know, what the effect is. I think all that $5 trillion, for the most of it, is spent already, not the Inflation Reduction Act, but a lot of the other stuff. Yes?
So you're suggesting that this is the result of Keynesian economics, and also do you believe, or how would you compare the current state to the Weimar Republic?
Oh, we've got a long way to go to the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was in Germany when they started literally printing money. They had signed the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, and they had to pay back these enormous reparations that they'd never be able to pay back. So somebody got the bright idea of, hey, let's just print money. Then we can just pay it back that way. So when you print money, like we're seeing here, it causes inflation, more and more inflation, hyperinflation, to the point that it became, you know, it became cheaper to burn the money than to go buy wood. You know, money became basically worthless. Inflation up into the thousands and thousands of percent that just kept ramping right up until the whole system collapsed. So no, I think we're a long way from that.
Was that when they mentioned about it, was it a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread or
Exactly.
something like that?
Yeah, a wheelbarrow full of money to put in your fireplace, because it was
Right.
cheaper than buying wood.
Right.
BTU bucks.
What's that, BTU bucks? John?
the debt ceiling conversation factor into what you're showing?
Okay, the debt ceiling. Well, let's see. First of all, the debt ceiling, as it always is, the debt ceiling has been raised many, many times, many times. In fact, we're one of the few countries that has a debt ceiling, but we do. And it'll get raised at the very last second. At the very last second. And there'll be lots of political posturing about who's at fault about this, and it will get raised. We had some pretty big trouble in 2011. We actually got downgraded because it's so close to the last moment. But the point is, to raise the debt ceiling means that we're trying to pay off the bills that are already incurred. We can't raise the debt ceiling, we are going to default on our payments, and that would be a global financial crisis. That's never happened before. The question is, really, why does our debt ceiling keep going up? I think it's kind of what you're getting at. Yeah, why do we keep incurring more and more debt? Well, the answer is kind of simple, really. We have what I call a fatal demographic. 2/3 of our budget is Medicare, Social Security, and welfare. And those 2/3 are political suicide, political third rail to touch those. And they're just going to keep growing because we have an aging population that's just getting bigger, and we can keep them alive longer, and we can keep them sicker longer, so that part of the budget just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you cannot kill it. So that's why our debt level keeps expanding. Now, that sounds really grim too. It's not a great thing, but it's a trade-off. Japan has a debt level that's twice as big as ours. It's a trade-off in terms of the debt level versus growth. The more debt, the bigger debt level, the less growth you have. So it's a weight that way. The other way to think about it, since it seems insolvable, it's not. You can do what Canada does, which is embrace skilled legal immigration, actively bring skilled legal immigrants into the country because they create more jobs than Native Americans do. They can pay into Medicare, Social Security, welfare programs, and that would be a way to start moving us the other way. I don't know if that answered your question. Yes.
Could you bring back your slide, the oil impact?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As you were pointing out with as the oil went up, so did everything else, correct? The statement you made?
Oil prices are often associated with recessions. That's what that chart is about.
Right.
But usually, yes, oil prices are often highly correlated with inflation in general.
And of course, we're talking about foreign oil. That we're buying this foreign oil, that we're sitting on top of, and we're paying them, the foreigners, to do what we won't do because we're afraid of our global warming policy and all that kind of wonderful stuff. And we're not getting the oil out that we're sitting on top of. And we have people that know how to bring that oil up and reduce that price, and we fail to do anything about it.
Well, that's a policy argument I'm not sure I can get into.
That's the dumbness argument. When you're sitting on top of it and you're not pulling it out and you're paying another nation for it.
Well, this is price of West Texas Intermediate. That's our oil. Oil is traded in a global marketplace now. So our prices that we produce are highly correlated with global prices. Now, I understand what you're saying, that we used to have more oil, we used to be energy independent. And I thought that was a good thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And it still could be if we release the dumb policies that are restricting the ability to withdraw that and use that, but we're going to sit back and pay other nations to do what we won't do.
Well, again, we are still producing a lot of our own oil. one of the world's biggest oil producers, if not the second biggest. But yeah, there are policies which are starting to tamp that down. They're pretty well-spoken policies that the current administration says we really want to do away with fossil fuels. So, yeah, that's,
Fossil.
it's a problem,
It's a problem, right?
yes.
Are there certain industries that you can look at that are kind of indicative that a recession is coming? That show that a recession is coming before you really, I mean, it's kind of like, is there an industry that you can really look at that's good, that shows where the economy is headed?
Mhm. I think one of the obvious ones would be consumer discretionary, like luxury goods. Everybody's got to buy gasoline and food, but they don't have to buy discretionary goods. So when you see that kind of trail off, like retail sales, that might give you an idea. And things like transportation and vacations and cruise lines and airfare and that sort of thing. Those would give you an idea as well.
Is there a certain amount of reactionary to this, you know, where you start to hear talk of there being a recession down the way, and then you start to see maybe some job losses and that kind of thing? Is some of that more reactive than it needs to be? You know, I'm asking for an opinion, but,
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the question is.
okay. I'm just, it just feels like sometimes there's a reactionary element to maybe decisions being made about hiring and firing, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering if there's more of that in the present day than there may have been in the past.
Right, in terms of maybe their employers are looking at it in the future and saying,
Yeah.
oh, we think a recession's coming, so we're gonna let people go. Well, we're seeing a lot of that in the tech industry because they were the first ones to hire a lot of people out of the pandemic. In fact, they way overstocked, and that's why they're having to get rid of people. That is actually one of the last indicators to go, is employment, because people don't really want to fire people unless they really want to, because then it's hard to get people again. And that's why you don't really get job losses until after the recession has started. It's a lagging indicator, and the unemployment rate is much worse. It's a way lagging indicator. It tells you nothing about the future. But you know, there is some concern about layoffs. They're very concentrated in the tech industry, now spreading out a little bit. But I'm not so sure, you know, you could say, I think, if you're an employer, hey, we're starting to see, actually, we are starting to see some data of job openings, job listings, starting to peel off a little bit. But then you hear the anecdotes, and we've all heard it about you can't find anybody to work for you. So I'm not quite sure how to balance that. Yes, Langley?
Dan, I haven't counted, but my impression is from watching too much cable TV and maybe reading the newspaper too much that you're much, much more confident that there's going to be a recession. Indeed, pretty confidently you said this quarter, the first quarter, or the second quarter. My very strong impression is that most economists are saying, no, we're not going to get a recession until later this calendar year. And maybe we'll surprise people and escape it entirely. How confident are you that we'll have a recession in first or second quarter this year?
Well, let me put it this way. You can get any opinion you want.
Yep.
You can find any opinion you want by asking the person that has it. So there are a lot of opinions about whether it's going to happen. I think the majority is saying yes, quite likely to have a recession in 2023. All the signs are pointing that way, all the classic signs, and again, it's just a matter of the Federal Reserve is just rolling right over the economy. They can't stand that. Now, we're currently saying this quarter, and that's what all the data would say. We may be a little bit early, but we expect the recession to be short, maybe 3 quarters, and shallow. that I think we're in the majority. I'm in the minority on the labor market, but we're in the majority on the recession call, which is not always a good thing, but I'm pretty sure.
Dan, what do you mean by shallow?
We don't lose much in the way of growth. We don't lose too many jobs, that sort of thing. It slows down a little bit. That's, it's not like the Great Recession when we lost, I don't know, 10 million jobs, something like that, and it took 6 years to get them all back. That would be a deep recession. Yes?
Thank you for sharing with us this very valuable and forthright assessment of where we are. There was a term you used, the confluence of factors.
Right.
And you see these factors, energy prices, employment, prior to recessions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always see all of them, which brings me to the point of questioning. I don't have any question there's going to be a recession.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question of how deep and how long.
Right.
And right now, with the Federal Reserve, it seems there's a real issue of them running into a brick wall with pivoting on interest rates and creating a truly stagnatory, stagflation environment that would lead to a rolling, ongoing recession, multi-year recession. And I just wonder if you have some thoughts or opinions about that.
I wouldn't think a multi-year recession. Most of them, the average recession is like since 1945 is about 11 months. The Great Recession was 18 months, so that was an exception. But I don't think it's going to be long and deep.
I guess I misspoke. Recessions are short.
Yeah.
Recovery is the word I should use.
Okay, so this gets into the definition of what a recession is. If you're at the beach and the tide comes in, that's when the economy is growing. When it starts going out, that's when it's receding. It's going away from you, it's shrinking. Now when it stops going out, that's when you say the recession's over. And that's when people say to me, what are you talking about? You gotta be kidding me that the recession's over. Business conditions are still bad. The tide is still out, but it's stopped getting worse. That's what it means when we say the recession is over. The tide is starting to come back in. Now, I think your question was, can we go into a long recession because
Longer recession, especially longer recovery, and negative interest rates hurt. And we have that. And if they stop raising interest rate, and inflation continues, it's, nobody knows the future, but it strikes me as we're in, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
Never
Mark
heard that
Twain
one
said
before.
that. It's negative interest rates.
yeah, you're saying
And it's
that-
been going on for a while, and it doesn't look like it's going to. A 25 basis point move last week is not going to, I think, squash inflation.
you're talking about negative real rates, right? Not nominal rates.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, we haven't had I was always shocked when they tried the nominal negative interest rate project, even 0% rates here. From that aspect, it's a good point that, maybe having another interest rate hike would bring us to positive real interest rates. I just don't think I think it may be worth waiting for a little bit, because I think we've had a lot of ammunition already shot at the economy, which hasn't gotten there.
The other thing is, I will say that a very good chart on the balance sheet of the Fed, and they have scaled back from the news of less than maybe a year ago on quantitative tightening.
Mhm.
And that, the last numbers I saw, it's been a couple of months or something. They're not,
They're not moving very fast on that, no. That's why I was giving the comparison to Canada is moving very, very quickly. Their central bank actually manages their economy much better. But again, it's kind of the financial market thing. We tried this once before, back in 2013, I think we called it the taper tantrum. Yeah, back in here, financial markets really melted down when we tried to take away the punch bowl, try to get rid of all that liquidity. And that's kind of the big risk of blowing up this balance sheet. It's really hard to bring it back down. They're doing it a little bit at a time. Yes.
This has been fascinating.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it. What strikes me is that you've talked about how slow the reaction is and what the Fed does to the economy. And how do we have a more agile federal system? Like you're just saying, Canada seems to have a central bank that helps move things a little differently than what happens here. I'm thinking 50 years from now, we'll all be dead, but 50 years from now, I mean, my whole lifetime is in that, 1963 to now. So it's this crazy up and down. How do we have more agility as a country to not have such spikes? I mean, obviously, we've just had the craziest thing happen with COVID. And I can understand why we're out of control now, because we've never been where we were. So it just seems, what would you say to, like my son, who's 18,
Get to work.
Right, so how do we set a better template than what we have?
Well, here's what happens is no matter when the Federal Reserve makes a decision, it's not when they make a decision, it's like that's going to take 3 to 5 quarters to flow through the economy. It operates with a lag. There's nothing you can really
There's nothing you can do
about
about that. There's
No.
no agility to be more agile, to have things flow faster.
No, I think about that, but I don't think so. I mean, you raise by 25 basis points, auto loans go up a little bit, it takes a while to flow through to an auto worker, for instance, who may get laid off. It just takes a long time for interest rates to flow through and affect the economy. That's an historical fact. That's just.
So we're never going to change that. I
Oh,
know it's a kind
never's
of
a-
a naive question.
Never's a long time. I just don't have, I don't have an idea how you would change it. It's always operated with the lag. In a sense, that's how you could give them a little bit of a pass, but not these guys. They've really blown it. Yes.
Are other countries showing these same trends? And if not, is there a country that isn't showing these trends?
Major developed economies. Most of Europe, which we're about 25% of global GDP, Europe is as well. Europe's skating right on the edge of recession. Same types of things. Dealing with inflation, a little bit of an energy crisis, raising interest rates, too big a balance sheet, all the same kind of things. Canada's going to go into recession as well. What's going to give us positive GDP growth for the world is, like it or not, is China is going to grow this year. They're going to grow at what's called 3%. Well, that's a recession for them. China's used to growing at 6 or 7%, so going down to 3% is virtually a recession, but it's positive. And it's the second biggest economy in the world. India is going to be growing as well. So China's getting out of it, it looks like, if you consider 3% is getting out of it. But most of the developed world is dealing with the same sort of things. Yes. He's got notes. This could be.
Oh, no, I don't have my glasses, so I can't read my own notes. But the Fed balance sheet is growing massively. How much of that is reversible in the medium term? I mean, is it gonna only continue to grow? We're gonna see an asymptote going, off the charts?
No, it's shrinking. If you look, squint your eyes really hard, you see it's actually going down.
Yeah.
And the way they grow the balance sheet is to buy securities on the open market.
Right.
US Treasury bonds, mortgage-backed securities in large amounts. And they tapered off those purchases. And now they're doing something like rolling off. Let's say you have a 10-year Treasury note that would mature. Well, they'd reinvest that to keep the balance sheet the same size. Now they're just letting it roll off. They're not necessarily reinvesting. That's why it's going off, but going off slowly. And they're slowing, purchases.
That much easy money for that long, generally throwing more money at less quality investments or borrowers, who's absorbing and who's looking at those secondary markets absorbing, not, obviously we'll pay our debts, but the economy in general, the larger economy, are the secondary markets still functioning, buying everyone's paper and keeping going? And is that going to get anywhere near the kind of freeze-ups that we've seen?
That's why they're doing it slowly. That's why they're having to do it slowly. But the global market for US Treasuries is still very liquid, still functioning. Let's say for when they used to buy a 10-year Treasury note, and now they're not reinvesting it, somebody else is buying it. And that market is still pretty strong globally.
And Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, all the recommendations, all of them get to work?
If they're not working, yes.
I believe last week Saudi Arabia got off of petrodollar. Do you have any insight into that and what the possible repercussions of it would be?
No, I don't know anything about that. Sorry. I'll tell you when I don't know. This I know, don't know that one. Yeah.
Any thoughts on fiscal policy being a countervailing force to monetary policy?
I think that you could say that fiscal policy, which is run by Congress and the administration, the Republicans are now in control of the House, so they're demanding some spending cuts. But everybody likes to spend in Congress, so I don't think that that's really going to be a drag. Obviously, throwing $5 trillion into the economy so just to give you an idea of what happened. After the economy shut down, we had 4 acts in the course of less than a year that put $5 trillion into people's pockets. Well, the usual budget for the whole U.S. economy is $5 trillion, which gets spread out all over Medicare, Social Security, many other things. So it's a gigantic amount. It certainly helped inflation. Going forward, I think the answer to your question is probably no. I don't think that fiscal policy is really going to shrink. Yeah, are you again?
Yeah, just something you said, you started talking about the global picture. Well, the dollar has been extremely strong recently, but now that is starting to, whether you say falter or just readjust. But a dollar readjustment could add substantially to inflation. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, one source of that is typically dollar-denominated commodities like oil will go up in price when the US dollar goes down. You're still buying the same barrel of oil today that you bought yesterday, and the dollar's weaker, you have to pay more dollars to buy it. So effectively the price goes up, and that's true of any dollar-denominated commodity. So yes, a weaker dollar would certainly put pressure on commodities, no two ways about it. And let's see, a weaker dollar would also make imports more expensive. But the thing about the dollar, which currencies in general, stock markets, economic growth always goes up on a slow glide path. Currencies go like this over time. And so it's, they were strong a while ago, right? Strong compared to what? stronger than they were, a year ago. Now they're weaker compared to what, 6 months ago. So you can pick your time frame for currency and say anything you want to about it. But your point is taken. When the dollar gets weaker, it creates inflationary pressures.
All right, we have one more.
I got nowhere to go.
I'm in.
The war in Ukraine,
Yes.
once, hopefully, 2023, we'll see the end of that. That's hopeful, but
Yeah.
that may not happen. How much does that, obviously there's lots of our money going in that direction too. Once that is completed at some point,
Mhm.
how will that affect our economy? Will that be a factor?
In terms of,
Inflation and what
right.
recession, what you're talking about?
I don't think so, because, what is the number, $50 billion we spent over there?
Yeah.
Well, if you look at our annual budget, had a pie graph, it would be about that big. Yeah, our government functions in terms of moving money from one pile to the other. Most of it is funding Social Security, Medicare, welfare. There's some defense spending, there's some discretionary spending, there's some infrastructure, and then there's a little tiny bit of foreign aid. So whether that continues or doesn't, I don't think it's gonna have that big an effect. Yeah. Oh, you again. Okay.
Continue that.
You've asked me 2 hard questions now.
To continue that thought, the Lend-Lease program helped, some people argue, got us out of the Great Depression. If we sell enough military equipment to this war, shouldn't that also contribute to getting out of recession?
Right, so that's kind of like make work in a way, right?
You're gonna shoot yourself in the foot.
Say that again?
It's kind of like make work in a way. I mean,
I'm not
it's,
sure what that is.
well, it's like the programs during the Great Depression.
The WPA.
Yeah, the WPA, it's like, we'll create this job, this artificial job, and then we'll pay these people. I don't know, you're saying if we keep creating,
As long as U.S. weapons are being purchased to support a war, then that would contribute to our GDP, correct?
I think you're right about that. I think that's right. You get people employed to build stuff, and they get paid because they're adding value. But yes, you're right. I'm not sure that's a great way to go about things.
I don't think it is, but it seems like it's happening.
Yeah, but again, that's a really small amount. You don't see a big tick up in employment in the defense industry and that sort of thing. Defense stocks are doing well because of this situation, but I don't think there's a big increase in defense employment. Okay, I am up here. And Cassandra wants to close it down.
No, I
but-
don't. I literally could stand and talk to him, or sit and talk to him for hours on end. I think he's amazing, and I want you to all show your appreciation.